Okay. I am your host, Justin Ellis. This is the Topwater Podcast. Welcome to the show. Well, if I could call it a show. It's not it's just really just more me just kind of outlining my experiences of fishing and just kind of letting you know where I'm having success and where I'm actually having failures and just kind of trying to figure it out, and trying to figure out new lakes, new places, trying out new gear, because I'm kind of in the beginning stages of my fishing. I mean, you could say fishing career, but I'm not necessarily going to be one of those guys that's fishing the FLW tournament series or like Bass Classic tournament series. I'm not going to be doing that sort of thing. Because, I mean, that's really cool, like, the dudes that do that. I mean, I've fished a couple tournaments before when I was a kid, but that's just not my style of fishing, that's just not my thing. I think it's cool, and it's fun to watch, and it's fun to see what those guys do and how they fish and how they approach lakes and, how they, just kind of deal with adverse conditions and being able to adapt to bad situations, and I try my best to do in a way, try to do the same. I just kind of want to be able to adapt whenever times are tough, whenever the bite is hard. Maybe I'm dealing with something that's, like a post front condition, or dealing with really cold weather, dealing with cold water. And I think that's a good thing for me to be able to get out there and try to dial in some sort of pattern. And also at the same time, trying to find fish along the ways. Because if I can find them in the wintertime, I can follow them up through spring and into summer, and then back into fall, and then just the cycle continues. So as the bass move from place to place, I don't have to necessarily search too far. Like, I have kind of a clue of where they're probably going to be going, but I have to find them first. And I think wintertime is a great time to be able to do that, because they're all drawing down into a central location. So if I know that all the bass are drawing down into the central location at this one point, then maybe whenever springtime hits, high waters, to where we have, especially here in Missouri, to where we have like flooding conditions like last year, and those bass are just far up into those creeks and just posted up on trees, and good luck. There's probably one bass per every so tree, because there's just so much water to cover, but you can't get to a lot of it. Even in a kayak, I was finding places on Stockton Lake to where I really couldn't go too much further because of the amount of dense brush that you would have to be able to kayak through, and you couldn't really do it. Also, at the same time, I was dealing with a lot of mosquitoes. So that's another thing, is you're going to have to deal with a lot of bugs, because there's not a lot of wind back into those trees, back into those creeks. And, it's kind of tough fishing. You're just going to have to, do your best to find fish in that sort of time. But see, I don't want to start fishing during that time. I don't want to learn where the fish are whenever they're just scattered throughout the lake. I want to be able to find them whenever they're in a very centralized location. And that's why I've picked Stockton Lake in order to start fishing that during the winter. Unfortunately, this weekend, I wasn't actually able to fish it, because I planned on fishing it on Sunday, but it is Sunday. The day that I'm actually recording this is today. We are having some winter weather, and I think if you're not in a situation to where you have to make a risky call, don't put yourself into that situation. So I didn't want to put myself all the way out about 50 minutes away from my hometown, on a backcountry highway that has curves and turns and hills and stuff like that. And beyond that, whenever there's potentially ice coming down. Now, if it was snow, I think I'd be perfectly fine with snow. I think snow I'd be fine with. I'd probably go out there in some snow. But ice, no. You know what? It's kind of one of those, I'd rather be safe than sorry at this point, instead of, just risking it just to go out there and get some sort of content, which, most likely I would have went out there and not caught anything at all. Because, I haven't even gotten a bite out there since I've really kind of started dedicating myself to fishing this place. But I mean, since it's so recent, I can't really just say, "Oh, well, this place isn't fishing good." No, I've only started fishing it recently. So what I'm trying to get to, or the point I'm trying to make, is I can't count the lake out. I'm not going to count the lake out because I have just started. I've just started. I'm very, very inexperienced on this lake. Also, I don't necessarily know the patterns of the boats on this lake and where they run and where they're going to be running really, really frequently. Or maybe where places to where I could put in that would be more advantageous for myself. Since I'm in a kayak, I can actually launch out of places that you wouldn't think you could launch out of. But as long as I can just grab this thing up and just throw it in the water, I can pretty much launch where I want to, which is pretty cool. But I think I just need to, I kind of lost my train of thought. What I was trying to get to about fishing that place, and the reason why I didn't fish it, is because of the bad weather that was happening in my area, and I didn't want to get stuck way out of town. So I decided Sunday it'd be just kind of play it by ear. If there was a point to where I saw to where I had a nice few hour window to be able to go out to Springfield Lake and fish, I thought that would be a good idea, and to go ahead and do that, which I did. But see, the cool thing is I kind of need to back the time clock up to Saturday, because I'm really getting ahead of myself. So Saturday, I get up and I need to do some Christmas shopping. So I decided to go to Bass Pro just to do a little bit of Christmas, get a little bit of Christmas presents, get some stuff for my niece and nephew, and I picked up a couple things for myself. I picked up a couple of underspins. I picked up a Berkeley Fusion half-ounce underspin, and I also picked up the Bass Pro brand, and also they had some screw locks that you can screw into a soft plastic that was attached to an underspin. So basically, you can just attach an underspin to whatever swim bait you want to, you have, and now you have a underspin. So I was just trying them out, and Saturday I get done buying my stuff, and luckily I get out of there relatively, not just breaking the bank. The thing is I bought a couple things. I bought a live target swim bait, which I think I should have bought the shad profile, but I ended up I bought the trout one just because, I don't know, it just seemed a little bit different. Maybe the different profile may just cause them to be more curious about it, especially in a lake like Springfield Lake, to where, there's going to be, you got all sorts of different lures just being tossed out there. So in order for those fish to bite, they bite on very, very specific types of lures, and a lot of them are reaction based. So I kind of figured buying this big swim bait, I mean, it's not like too big. I mean, I think it's probably about 6 inches. And I go out there with it and I'm throwing it around. I don't do any good, but that's okay. I also don't think that I really put enough time into it. I feel like this sort of style of bait is one of those types of baits that you kind of need all day to be throwing it and not expect to get a bite except for like once or twice off of it, but have those bass be quality bass, because most likely the thing that's actually going to eat that is going to be fairly sizable. I don't see any sort of smaller bass trying to take a, I mean, I see smaller bass like swiping at it and taking a chance at it, but I don't see them getting actually hooked just because of how big the bait is. I don't think they could actually get it in their mouth to where you could actually get the hook in. Now, that being said, there is that chance that they do get the hook in and you do catch a bass that's the same size as the bait. You know, that actually does happen from time to time. And it's actually kind of funny when that does. I haven't really had that happen yet, but it'll be cool. I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting to catch a tiny bass on a big lure. Every time I throw a big lure, I always think, man, I'm going to catch a tiny bass. Every time I throw a big lure, I always think I am. That's just kind of, but back to the store. So I buy that. I also buy some shaky head stuff. I bought some swamp crawlers and some double tail grubs in order to go on the back of my jigs. So I get that sort of stuff, and I leave the store, go home. I had plans with a friend later on that day, but he had some family stuff, and, you know, that's how life goes. So I had some free time. So what to do with a little bit of free time? I decided to go out to Springfield Lake. So I get out to Springfield Lake, and I kind of just really didn't know what to expect when I got out there. I kind of expected there to be people out there, but I also kind of expected there to be no people at the same time. I mean, there was a few folks out there, but I get there and I put in, and I just immediately go to the south end corner. I immediately go there because I had already caught fish over there. And since it is wintertime, I can just kind of expect that the fish are going to be on that point day after day after day. You know, they're wintering there for a reason. And probably because there's shad in that sort of pocket, because it kind of comes to a corner, and that's where the river channel actually runs down, and it gets really deep there. So it goes from mud flats to really deep and hard bottom that's right up close to the bank. So those fish kind of relate to those big chunk rock that are coming off of that side that collapse off into the water that make these little points and stuff. And where I was, there's a tree that overhangs. So off that tree, there's a bit of a point, which also holds bass. And that's where I caught them the week before. And so I thought, why not? Why not just go there since I have a couple of hours? I'm going to go there because that's my high percentage spot. That's where they're probably going to be, is in that same general area. And as long as I go there first and kind of anchor off and not close to it and just be able to cast past it, but not to where, you know, where I'm up on it, onto this tree. And I cast out, and I let it sink to the bottom. And it's just probably about, I would almost say, 10, 15 feet past the tree. And since I was kind of almost parallel with it, I was able to like almost angle it to where the wind caught it. And I was able to bring the bait actually under the tree when I had the retrieve. But I was able to cast a little bit on the outside of it. And so as it was coming up under the tree, and the type of retrieve that I was doing was a very, very slow retrieve. I just let it sink all the way to the bottom, and then I would just reel it fast enough to where it's not getting hung up on stuff, but it's still bumping into it. And it's just bumping into as much stuff as possible right off the bottom. And I was using a underspin jig head. And as it was coming underneath that tree, I just felt the tick. That's all it really is. It's just this little thump. And it's very light. And it just, that happens, and then you almost feel this wet sock feeling. And when that happened, I just set the hook. And when I say set the hook, I really just mean I just leaned into it fairly hard. So that way it would drive the hook into the fish's lip halfway decently. Or if it was into like any sort of cartilage, or like I was able to like sink that hook through. But since it was a new hook, I really don't think I would have a problem with it. So I just kind of pulled really hard. And with a open swim, like with an open hook like that, you don't really have to like set the hook as hard as you can. You don't have to drive the hook hard. You don't have to drive it home, essentially. You just have to lean into it. And that's what I did. And immediately I knew I had a decent fish on. That rod loaded up, and it had a decent bend. And the rod I was using was my Dobbins Fury rod. That's become my new favorite rod. I mean, of course, I understand the reason why, because it's the best rod I have, and it's the most sensitive rod I have. And also, for right now, it's the most reliable rod I have. My other two rods, the reels, are these Bass Pro brand reels. And whenever I try to pop like a jig or anything like that, I kind of have to like hold on to the handle or something like that, because it'll actually cause the handle to go backwards a little bit. And I think I don't know if that's just because I'm using braid on them, or whether or not they're just cheap reels, because they are. I bought them at the outlet, so I can't be too mad. I mean, you kind of pay for what you get. If you're gonna pay for cheap stuff, you're gonna get cheap quality. And that's kind of what I did. But I didn't really have too much money. I didn't really have too much like research into it, or any sort of like investment thought into it. I was just trying to get rods in order to go fishing. And that's where I started. And now just kind of already dealing with these cheaper reels, I got to go with the higher quality reels. I really do. Just because I need them to be reliable. I need to be reliable for a fairly decent amount of time. So I'm going to start replacing those reels off of those rods with a higher price point reel. Something that actually has quality. I like my Shimano SLX. I like that onto that Dobbins Fury rod. It's a very nice reel for the price. I like it. It's smooth. It feels quality. That's the reel that I've caught all these fish within the past couple weeks off of, and it's handled really nice. Now, back to that whole point that I was talking about with the fish. So I hooked it, and when I set the hook, that rod loaded up, and that Dobbins Fury, I like the bend in it because it's a stout. It's not like a stout rod. It has a decent parabolic bend. So when I set the hook into it, it loads up really nicely. And I think if it wasn't for that, when I got that fish up close to the kayak, I think I would have lost that fish. If I had it on a stiffer rod than that, I probably would have lost that fish. Now, that also being said, I probably will never net another largemouth. Or, yeah, pretty much I will probably never net another largemouth when I have it on a single hook. Now, if it's on a treble hook, I'm going to net it. Because with those treble hooks, if it sits there and shakes, especially any sort of bait that has one treble hook, it usually has more treble hooks. So it just kind of makes it a little bit of a more precarious position that it puts you in. So you're more likely to get hooked with a treble hook in a fish's mouth than you are to get hooked with a single jig hook or just a regular single hook. But during that whole time when I got that bass up to the boat, it's sitting there jumping around and thrashing around, and I'm trying to get my net because it's a little bit bigger of a fish. I figured might as well use the net. I should have just disregarded that and just grabbed it with my hands. I should have just lipped it. Because, I mean, you really got to think about it. A largemouth bass, the bigger it gets, the easier it becomes to grab in the mouth. You get, anything plus 5 pounds, I could probably put my hand and grip it with my whole entire hand. I wouldn't have a problem with that. And it's not like it's a catfish to where it has like spines and stuff like that, and it likes to roll and thrash a lot. Usually when you grab a bass, there's a lot of the times, especially those bigger ones, it'll just kind of like relax because you already got them. And also they're just that, I really don't know the reason why they don't. But I should have just grabbed it instead of trying to get my net. That's kind of a lesson learned, is because I could have just lipped it, took the hook out, took the pictures, put it back, and it would have taken less time. That fish would have been out of the water for less time. It would have been back on its way quicker. And I think that's kind of one of, almost a little bit of a goal that I'm trying to, in a way, achieve, is to any fish that I'm going to release to not let it spend a lot of time out of the water, to make sure that the amount of time that I have to handle the fish is as short of an amount of time as possible. And I think that's important for the development and the sustainability of these fish, because the less trauma that I can impose onto this fish, it's going to probably survive because of that. And it's kind of like, from what I understand, because I haven't really caught any fish that's like super, super deep, but apparently if you're usually like not jig fishing, but like if you're fishing any sort of depth, like 40, 50, 60, 70 feet, and you bring those fish up, apparently their swim bladders will actually expand because of the depth that they were at. So it'll actually kill the fish if it doesn't get back into the water in a certain amount of time. So if you're spooning for fish and you're also releasing those fish, you need to apparently take them off as quick as possible and throw them back. Like, don't worry about taking pictures sort of thing. Just kind of unhook and throw, have some fun, but just understand you have to get those fish back in the water as quick as possible because they got to get back to that depth or else their swim bladder will actually expand and kill them. So there's always proper handling of the fish, and there's always improvements that I could always do on my part in order to make it to where these fish actually survive after being caught, just to kind of, it's part of like, etiquette, manners, courtesy, whatever you want to call it. It's just something I just kind of try to improve on every time I catch a fish. Every time I catch a fish, I try to make sure that the time that they're in my hands is as little time as possible. But sometimes it doesn't happen like that. Sometimes you have chaos. Sometimes it's, you fuck up a little bit. And that happens, But you kind of deal with it. You have to think about it, and you just adjust from there. Understand that you are going to make mistakes, and that's part of fishing. Kind of like, even that same day, I made mistakes. One of the mistakes is I didn't wear enough clothing. Like it kind of sucks because, I could have stayed out there and actually kept fishing for a lot longer. And I wasn't actually able to do that because I was only wearing blue jeans, a hoodie, and a long sleeve shirt. I wasn't really paying attention to the weather, and I also thought that I was only going to be out there for a little bit. I'm going to be out there maybe an hour, maybe 2. I've been out in the cold weather in blue jeans and a hoodie. I'll be fine. No, it got cold. It got cold. My hands got wet. And especially dealing with that fish with my hands in that water, whoo, man, my hands started stinging pretty quick. And yeah, by the time I released it, my fingers were numb. So yeah, so my setup wasn't good enough. I got cold pretty quick, and I had to call it quits pretty quick. But it was okay because I just lost my underspin that I had caught that 4-pound bass off of. And I did weigh this one. I did weigh it, and it weighed 4 pounds on my scale. So that's what it is. I didn't measure to see how long it was, but it was fairly long. I think if it would have been springtime before the spawn, that would have been like a 5-6 pound bass. It would have been a decent bass. Maybe more. I don't know. Depending. I don't know how big those bass really get, but it looked pretty big. It looked like it could get to a sizable size if it was feeding up. But I had also lost that underspin. And not only had I lost that underspin, one of my reels just went out on me. It was the cheap Bass Pro reel, and I had gotten my jig stuck in some rocks or some trees or something like that, and I tried to pop it out. And when I tried to pop it out, the reel just all of a sudden just started going backwards. And I think it's just because of the cheap quality of the reel. Now, I've caught a lot of bass off of this reel, so I've actually done some work with the amount of money that I've paid for this reel has paid for itself, essentially. This reel has done what it's supposed to do. It has done its job. And I've got my money's worth out of it. I've caught multiple bass off of it. I'm pretty sure I've caught the biggest bass that I've ever actually caught off of it on that reel. So it's done some work. But it is also not a quality reel, so it's starting to go out. And I've had it for a few years now. I've done a lot of fishing with it, so it's been through its paces. I've put that thing through its paces, and it's now needing to go into the trash. So I think I'm just going to upgrade it with nicer reels. But I mean, that's kind of a good thing that I need to be doing. I need to upgrade my stuff. If I'm going to be putting in this much time, I do need to spend money. I need to save up my money and invest it into buying nicer reels and nicer equipment because of the amount of time that I'm actually going to be spending out in the water. And especially as well, if I'm going to be doing winter sort of style fishing, I need to start investing into better equipment when it comes down to my gear that I'm wearing myself. You know, Saturday, I got pretty cold. I mean, today when I went out, I felt fairly good for the long period of time that I was out there. And also, when I went out there, I didn't do very good. I ended up just losing some baits. I got a couple short strikes, but, I mean, they just kind of pulled my pants down. That was about it. You know? But it's wintertime. It's winter fishing. There's some winter weather pushing through, and I didn't really expect them to be biting very hard or very much. I really kind of expected it to be a very, very slow day. And if I even got one, if I caught one fish, it would have been a great day. Since I got a couple of bites, it's not a bad day. But I came a little bit more prepared when it came down to the clothing that I was wearing. I actually put on some thermal underwear, put on some thicker socks, and threw on a Carhartt coat. But also at the same time, I'm also thinking about that. All that stuff that I'm wearing is not very good for getting wet. And really thinking about it, all that stuff is not really good if you fall in. It's very heavy. It soaks in a lot of water. It's not very good. And thinking about that, I think I really need to upgrade my winter clothing and upgrade what I would classify as cold weather clothing. Because this is cold weather clothing. It's just, it's cold weather on land, not in the water, you know. Because when you're wearing all that stuff, you're not thinking that, oh, I'm going to fall in the water. You're really more thinking that, you know, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to work on my car, or I'm going to rake some leaves or some, you know, something like that. But I have to consider falling out of a kayak. That's part of the reality that I'm kind of living in because of the size of my watercraft. Some people don't want you calling it a boat. It's not a boat. It floats. I can stand on it. You know, I wouldn't call a pontoon a boat. It's more of a floating platform than anything else. But, you know, you can still call it a boat if you want. It's America. Call it a boat. So I have to consider actually falling out of this thing. And I don't think that if I fell out of it wearing the clothing that I typically wear when it's cold, that when I come out of that water back into, you know, 32, 33, 34 degree temps, that I would be okay. Matter of fact, I don't think I would be okay to make it back to my car with all that cold. I mean, I might. I mean, we're not talking about that far of a paddle. But how fast does hypothermia set in? You know, do you know how fast are you going to die? You know, and that's something to kind of consider. I mean, even on a lake like Springfield Lake, to where I can see my car from where I'm fishing, and I'm pretty sure I could swim that distance. I'm pretty sure that if I got in on the south end of that lake, that I could swim over to where I can park my car and put in. I could probably swim from where I was fishing to there. But in cold weather, that's a different beast. You know, that's more about can you survive instead of can you swim. And I would rather put more of the survival into my favor rather than, just being negligent or being ignorant to the fact that you're dealing with nature. And when you're dealing with nature, you can't take shortcuts. You really can't, because taking a shortcut could possibly mean that you're not going to come home. And you have to think about that, and you have to understand that. Don't let that scare you from going out. Don't let that scare you from getting a kayak and doing some wintertime fishing. But just do it with an understanding that there's risk involved. So when you're taking these sort of types of risks, you need to make sure you're adequately dressed and adequately prepared for what you're dealing with, and for the weather conditions, for the cold, and everything. Your experience also matters. Do you have a lot of experience in kayaking? I mean, right now, I have less than a year of experience. So me going out there is actually way more of a risk than somebody who's been doing it for 5 years, for 10 years. Someone who's actually been in the situation to where they've actually dumped their kayak. Now, kayaks have been getting more and more stable to where you're more likely not to tip them over as long as you're in decent conditions. And I was in really good conditions. It's not saying that the type of weather that I was dealing with was really adverse conditions. It was just cold. It was just cold and a little breezy. Enough to push me around fast enough to where I would need to anchor off, because of the retrieve rate on my baits had to be so slow and so particular that these bass weren't going to eat it any other way. So that also being said, the conditions weren't bad. The conditions were actually pretty decent. It was just, like I said, it was just cold. And when my hands and feet are like numb and start to hurt, it's probably just about time to start packing it in and getting back in. I'm not going to let myself get that cold, because I've let myself get cold before. And actually, I've let myself get cold before in conditions that I didn't think I would even get that cold in. Like, I went out to James River, and I went up the river fishing, and it was supposed to be a fairly rainy day, but it was supposed to be like, 60s. But I didn't really think anything of it. I had a rain jacket on. Well, I had a rain poncho, not a rain jacket. I went to Walmart and bought a rain poncho, and the only one I could find was this one that was a t-shirt. I mean, what's the point of having a rain jacket or a rain poncho that doesn't cover your arms? I mean, you might as well, I don't get that. Like, I'm only, here's a poncho that only covers part of your body. Hooray, you're most of the way dry. Thanks. But it was the only one they had, and I needed something, and it was better than nothing. So I ended up buying it, and I ended up going fishing. And I ended up spending about 45 minutes just paddling until I got to where it started becoming more like a river and less like a channel. Because the James River where I put in is pretty much just a giant channel. It's just deep spots. That's all it really is. And I get all the way upstream to where it starts getting shallow, and there starts being rapids and deeper spots, and it starts breaking and stuff like that. And I portage through these rapids, and I keep going farther and farther up the river, and it starts raining on me. Well, at a certain point, my feet are wet, so I'm not really worried about that, because when your feet are wet, your feet are wet. And they're not going to get any drier than what they are. So I kept going. And I kept fishing. And I was catching decent fish. I caught a nice spotted bass right off the beginning, But, I caught a spotted bass. I caught a few different largemouth. I caught a smallmouth. It was a great day of fishing. But I kept going up the river, and I kept having to portage through these spots. And I kept getting wet, and it kept raining. So eventually, I get to a point to where I'm being rained on consistently. And I'm starting to get cold. Not my fingers cold. Not things are starting to kind of go numb. But more of I start getting chills. Like my body's starting to get cold. And not my hands, which that was kind of the disturbing spot. And I was pretty far away. We're talking I ended up hitting a point to where I had to turn around. And the reason why I turned around is because of how I felt. And I felt like if I didn't turn around at that point, then I was possibly really starting to risk a lot. And I knew at that point that I was risking a lot there. I was starting to risk hypothermia, and I knew that in my mind because I started getting cold. Like my body was getting cold. Like I wasn't retaining heat. The stuff that I was wearing was more sucking the cold out of me rather than actually keeping me warm. And that was a pretty telltale sign, and I was pretty far away, and I started heading back. And I paddled as fast as I can. And also, the nice thing about being in a kayak is because it causes you to do work in order to get back, which also heats you up. So I was kind of staying warm, but I knew I couldn't stop. I knew once I started going, I needed to just go until I couldn't stop. Until I got back. I just couldn't stop. I really couldn't. And by the time I got back, I was cold. And when I mean I was cold, I was that weird cold to where it's like, you need heat. And it was such a weird feeling because it's like the best way to describe it is I couldn't get warm for a little bit. There was a very, very good amount of time to where I had a space heater just pointed on me and a blanket, and I just couldn't get warm. I just couldn't get warm for a good, I don't even know how long I was like that I couldn't get warm. The only other time that I've ever felt like that was after working in a freezer at Walmart for over a couple of hours, and it's like 10 below freezing. And I went home and I was under covers and I couldn't even get warm then. And it was a lot like that. But it was weirder because it wasn't like super cold. But I was. And it was cold enough to where it made me cold. And it was cold enough to really make me rethink what I was really doing out there and what type of risk I'm actually taking. Because I kind of think about that, and that was actually that was a really risky maneuver, or a really risky move, not maneuver, but it was still one of those things to where I wasn't properly geared. And I didn't have the experience to really understand that I wasn't properly geared. So this weekend, knowing that I'm not necessarily properly geared for wet, cold weather, I am fairly properly geared for just cold weather. Which, I mean, it did the trick. I mean, I had rain pants on, which really helped. But really thinking about it, I need to be prepared for taking a dive into the drink. That's what I need to be prepared for. I don't need to be prepared for rain or snow or ice or whatever that is, because none of that matters if I fall into the water. And if I have something that protects me from falling into the water, well, it's going to protect me from the elements outside, for sure. So maybe I should think about getting something like that NRS gear or something like that. I mean, it's super expensive, but it'd be worth saving up for. It'd be worth it having it, so that way if I ever did fall into the water, that I may have a chance. Not only that, I think I actually, really thinking about it, I need to make a cold weather kit for my kayak. Something to where if I did fall into water, I could actually be able to go to the nearest shore and be able to get warm. Or at least start to get warm. Or at least be able to survive. You know? Something to where if... Like to be able to start a fire. And I know, like, the park services and stuff like that don't want you starting fires in some of these places. But I also think that I would rather take a ticket over dying. You want to give me a citation for a fire? That's fine. I will take the citation for a fire, and not only that, I'm freezing to death. So help me. You know, that's kind of what I'm thinking, is I'll take the ticket if you rescue me at that point. You know, but I need those, but I think I need that. I need that sort of kit, and I need that sort of safety net in a way. Because the more and more that I do stuff in the outdoors, the more and more I really think about needing sort of stuff in order to be able to survive when things go wrong. That I need to prepare myself more for what could happen. That my actions, that maybe that risk reward system doesn't play out in my favor. That some days you may just get trapped. I mean, it's never happened to me before, but it could. I mean, why couldn't it happen to me? Why couldn't it, why couldn't a storm pop up and just trap me somewhere? You know? Why couldn't a boat drive a little too close during wintertime and dump me off my kayak? I mean, why couldn't that happen to me? You know? And I think thinking about stuff like that really kind of puts it in perspective about how you need to think about safety equipment and how I should be thinking about safety equipment. And especially being as inexperienced as I am, I really should think about those things. And I need to put them on my kayak, and I need to make sure that those sort of things, like maybe having a flare, maybe that's not a bad thing to have. Or having like I said, a way to start a fire. Having warm clothes in a dry bag. You know, maybe wearing wool. Trying to find some wool so that way I can wear that. Because apparently wool is really good about retaining heat while it's wet. I've heard that. Like merino wool is really good. I think it's supposed to, from what I've heard, it retains up to like 70% of the heat that it used to when it was dry, which is damn good in my opinion. If you have something to where it's going to retain that much heat, then you should probably wear that. And that's something I should probably think about. Maybe I shouldn't spare too much expense when it comes down to warmth, when it comes down to safety equipment, and when it comes down to just being able to survive when things go wrong. You know, I mean, I would love to switch out my rods, but maybe I need to think about doing that. You know, it's not a bad thing to think about. You know, what's the point of replacing your reels with nicer reels when, you know, you're not going to be around to, you know, be able to fish with them? So I think safety first may be what I should be thinking about, especially with fishing this bigger lake, because that's always been kind of a thought in the back of my head, is being safe at this new lake, especially being in a kayak. I wouldn't feel too bad if I was in a boat, just like everybody else, but I'm not in a boat. I'm in a much smaller craft, and I can't rely on other people to be considerate or even to be able to notice. You know, I need to make it to where I'm as noticeable as possible. So I'm going to start doing that sort of thing, figuring out, get a flag put onto my kayak, which I should probably already have one of those. I don't know why I don't. Go get me a bike flag or something. Also, just having cold weather gear, having a extra pair of clothes into my kayak. That's a big one. Having an extra pair of clothes, dry clothes, because if I dump myself and I get to the shore, I'll at least want a pair of dry clothes. And the faster I can switch over into those dry clothes, the better off I am. Well, not to get like too crazy on safety. I kind of just went off on a little bit of a tangent on that. Well, I mean, in a way, it's kind of necessary, but in a way, it's more of a tangent on my own self and just kind of understanding that, I'm still new at this, and I don't need to be big-headed and thick-skulled about what I'm doing, and I don't need to be big-headed and thick-skulled about safety and about what I can do to help put my survival rate in my favor. Because, nature happens. Accidents happen, and you just got to be prepared for the unexpected. And the more prepared you are, the better off you're going to be. And I just rather be better off. I really would like to be better off. So there's that. But I think I'm going to have a fun time fishing next weekend. Because all this next week, after Monday, is going to be some nice 40-degree plus weather. And it's supposed to be really stable weather. So I think with all this stability into our weather patterns, it's actually going to, hopefully keep the fish maybe a little bit higher into the water column. I don't know if they are going to be higher in the water column or not. I don't know. I really don't know. At this point, I think I want to quit guessing at Stockton Lake until I actually start catching fish. I think at this point, it's just going to be like, we're just going to be hitting points, and we're going to be doing some things, and I'm just going to be figuring it out. I am going to try my best to figure it out, and I think I have a pretty decent idea of what I want to do. And what I want to do is probably just crawl a jig, drop shot, and throw a swim bait with an underspin on it. Maybe I'll probably will throw that big live target swim bait. I kind of want to, just because I want to catch a fish off of it. I think it'd be awesome to catch a fish off of a giant swim bait. It's just something about it just kind of gets me a little giddy inside. But I'm just going to leave expectations to where they lie. I'm not going to expect anything great or wonderful or any sort of action or barn burning action or whatever it may be. You know what? I'm really just expecting myself to go out and just relax and have some fun and just try to find the fish. I'm just going to try to just implement the same game plan as I was going to do this weekend, next weekend. See if it works. See if anchoring off those points work. Because it's supposed to be really nice this next weekend. I mean, we're talking Saturday is supposed to be, 50? And Sunday is supposed to be almost 60? Oh, yeah. I'm going to be doing some fishing. If it's going to be that warm, the only thing is I think it's going to be bluebird skies, which isn't going to be that good for me. Maybe it might be. Using a dark colored swim bait, maybe better. So that way it kind of gives it more of a backdrop. Well, not backdrop, but it makes it to where it stands out. When it's going through sunlight, it makes it a nice little profile when they're looking up at it. So, I don't know. We'll see. It'll be fun. I'll have some fun. So, it has been fun making this podcast, and I want to thank you guys for listening to me. And all of you, go out there, try to catch a bass, and you know what? If fishing ain't your thing, go out there and just have some fun. Find something that you're passionate about and do it. You know, don't think about it that much and just get into it and just get after it. You know, find something that you're passionate about and just have some fun, because I'm having fun right now, and I've been having, and it's been great being able to share it with you guys. You guys have a great night.